Am I the asshole for refusing to attend my dad's wedding because he didn't invite my mom? I know the title sounds ridiculous. Why would anyone want their parents, especially divorced parents, to be together at a wedding? But before you start thinking I'm crazy or just being difficult, let me explain how things got to this point. I, 29M, have had a complicated relationship with both of my parents for most of my life, but especially with my mom. My parents divorced when I was 14, and it wasn't pretty. My mom, Lisa, was controlling, manipulative, and, well, abusive. I spent a lot of time trying to wrap my head around what happened during my childhood. For years, I tried to minimize what she did, convince myself it wasn't that bad, and that maybe I was just being too sensitive. After all, she's my mom, right? But no, it was bad. She's the kind of person who could make you feel like you were worthless in one breath and then act like she was the only person in the world who truly loved you in the next. Growing up, nothing I did was ever good enough. If I brought home a B on a test, she'd ask why it wasn't an A if I got an A. She'd say I was getting cocky and needed to be humbled. I could never win with her, but I always kept trying, hoping for her approval, which, of course, never came. When I was a teenager, my dad, Rob, couldn't take it anymore. They argued all the time, and my mom's emotional abuse wasn't just directed at me. It was aimed at him too. She'd belittle him, mock him for his job, for not making enough money, for everything. Eventually, he packed up and left. I don't blame him for that. He was miserable. But when he left, I was stuck with her. That's when things got worse. Without my dad around to take some of the brunt of her anger, it all fell on me. I was 14, alone with a woman who controlled every aspect of my life. She guilted me into thinking that if I loved her, I wouldn't want to spend time with my dad. If I dared mention wanting to visit him, she'd cry and scream about how I was abandoning her, just like he did. So, I stopped asking. For years, I didn't see my dad much. She had me so twisted up that I honestly believed I was hurting her by wanting a relationship with him. Fast forward to now. I'm 29, and I've been working through a lot of this in therapy for the past few years. I've made some progress, at least enough to set boundaries with my mom and to rebuild a relationship with my dad. It hasn't been easy, but we're in a better place now. He's been with his fiancée, Jenny, for about 5 years, and she's great. She's kind, funny, and genuinely cares about him. When they announced they were getting married, I was happy for him. I thought maybe this time he'll get to have the kind of relationship he deserves. But then came the issue of the guest list. A few weeks ago, my dad and I were talking about the wedding plans, and I asked if my mom would be invited. I wasn't sure if she'd even want to go. Honestly, it seemed unlikely, but it felt like the right thing to do. As messed up as our relationship is, she's still my mom. I figured my dad would at least ask her, for my sake, if nothing else. Instead, he laughed. Why would I invite Lisa? She made my life hell for years. There's no way I want her anywhere near my wedding day. I get where he's coming from, believe me. I lived through that hell with him, but it still stung. It felt like he was completely dismissing the fact that she's my mom. It's not like I wanted them to get back together or even be friends. I just thought it would be a gesture of goodwill. Something to show that, despite everything, we're all still a family in some weird way. I didn't say anything in the moment, but it weighed on me for days. Finally, I called him back and told him how I felt. I told him that I thought he should invite her, not for himself, but for me. I explained that it would mean a lot to me if he could set aside their history just for one day, so we could all be there together. His response was not what I expected. He got angry. He told me that I was being unreasonable, that there was no way he was going to invite that woman to his wedding, and that I needed to get over it. He said that I was acting like a child, letting her manipulate me all over again, and that if I couldn't understand why she wasn't welcome, maybe I shouldn't come either. That hit hard. I tried to explain that this wasn't about me being manipulated. It was about trying to find some way to reconcile the two parts of my life. But he wouldn't listen. He told me that if I felt that strongly about it, maybe it was best if I didn't attend. I didn't know what to say. My dad's wedding is supposed to be a happy occasion, but now it feels like there's this huge divide between us. I don't want to miss it, but I also don't want to feel like I'm betraying my mom by going. And yes, I know she's done terrible things. I know she's hurt me and my dad in ways that are hard to forgive. But she's still my mom. And if I go to this wedding, knowing that she wasn't even considered, it feels like I'm choosing him over her. I've been wrestling with this for weeks, and I still don't know what to do. My therapist says it's okay to set boundaries with both of them, and that I don't have to choose one over the other. But that's easier said than done. If I don't go, I know it'll hurt my dad, and we've only just started rebuilding our relationship. But if I do go, I'm afraid it'll break something inside me that I've been trying to heal for years. To make matters worse, my mom found out about the wedding. She's been calling me non-stop, asking why she wasn't invited, and guilt-tripping me into siding with her. She's telling me that if I go, I'm proving that I don't love her, that I'm choosing him, and that I'm just like my dad, another person abandoning her. I know it's manipulative. I know that. But the thing about growing up with someone like her is that it's hard to stop hearing that voice in the back of your head. The one that tells you you're not enough, that you owe her something for all the years she put up with you. So here I am, stuck between my parents like I've been my whole life, and I have no idea what to do. Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to go to my dad's wedding because he didn't invite my mom? Or am I just being unreasonable? Update. A lot has happened since my original post, and I figured it was time to give an update. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who commented. It really helped me see things from a different perspective, especially about my relationship with my mom. A lot of you pointed out that I've been stuck in a cycle of trying to please her, and that maybe it's time to break free from that. That was hard to hear, but I needed it. After I posted, I decided to have a serious conversation with my dad. I told him that I didn't want to miss his wedding, but that I was struggling with the whole situation. He actually listened this time, which surprised me. He said he hadn't realized how much I was still affected by everything that happened with my mom, and that he understood why this was so hard for me. He didn't change his mind about inviting her. He was firm on that. But he did apologize for how he'd reacted before. And we had a real heart-to-heart about the years we lost because of her. He admitted that he'd been bitter about the divorce for a long time, and that seeing me still tied to her in some ways brought all that anger back. But he also said that he respected whatever decision I made about the wedding. That conversation helped a lot, but I was still on the fence about going. Then, a few days later, my mom called me again. This time, she wasn't crying or yelling. She was cold, calculating. She told me that if I went to the wedding, I'd be dead to her. She said I'd be no better than my father, a traitor to the family, and that she'd never speak to me again. It was in that moment that something snapped. For years, I've been bending over backward, trying to keep her happy, trying to avoid the guilt and the emotional blackmail. But this time, I didn't feel sad or guilty. I just felt done. I realized that no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough for her. She would always find a way to manipulate me, to make me feel like I owed her something. So, I told her that if that's how she felt, then maybe it was time we went our separate ways. She screamed at me, called me every name in the book, but I didn't care anymore. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. I went to my dad's wedding. It was beautiful, and I was happy to be there, to celebrate with him and Jenny. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was choosing something for myself, not because of guilt or obligation, but because I wanted to. As for my mom, I haven't heard from her since. I'm sure she's telling everyone that I abandoned her, but I'm okay with that. I'm done living for her approval. Now, I'm focusing on my own life, my own happiness, and building the relationships that matter to me. Thanks again to everyone who helped me see things more clearly. It's been a tough journey, but I'm finally starting to feel like I'm in control of my own life. Second update. So, here I am again. It's been a few months since my last update, and I thought things had finally settled down after my dad's wedding. But as it turns out, I was wrong. Very, very wrong. I thought cutting my mom out of my life would bring some peace, and for a while, it did. I felt lighter, more in control, and I was finally focusing on my own happiness. But as anyone who's dealt with a manipulative, toxic parent can probably guess, my mom wasn't going to let me go that easily. Part of me was relieved, no. Most of me was relieved, but there was a small part that was unsettled by how quiet things had gotten. I knew my mom, and I knew she wasn't the type to just give up that easily. Let me back up a bit. After my dad's wedding, I felt like I was finally free from my mom's grasp. I hadn't spoken to her since that awful phone call where she told me I'd be dead to her if I went to the wedding. At first, I was expecting her to blow up my phone with angry messages or guilt trips, but there was nothing, just silence. For a couple of weeks, I kept waiting for something to happen. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for the inevitable storm, but nothing came. I went about my life, trying to enjoy the peace and focusing on my work, my friends, and rebuilding my relationship with my dad. It was a weird adjustment, honestly, to not have that constant tension hanging over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Then, one morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. It was a Tuesday. Nothing unusual about that. But the moment I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. Standing there was my mom, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were wild, her hair a mess, and she had this frantic energy that immediately set me on edge. "Why haven't you called me?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You think you can just walk out of my life like that?" I was shocked. I hadn't spoken to her in months, and here she was, standing on my doorstep as if nothing had changed. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. "Mom, I told you, I needed space. I don't want to do this right now." But she wasn't listening. She pushed her way into my apartment, ranting about how I'd betrayed her, how I was just like my father, and how I'd abandoned her after everything she'd done for me. It was like she was stuck in a loop, repeating the same things over and over, getting louder and more aggressive with each word. I kept trying to reason with her, but it was no use. She wasn't there to talk. She was there to make me feel guilty, to drag me back into her world of control and manipulation. It was like all the progress I'd made, all the boundaries I'd set, didn't matter. In her mind, I still belonged to her, and she wasn't going to let me go without a fight. After what felt like hours of her screaming and accusing me of being the worst son in the world, I finally told her she needed to leave. That's when things escalated. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and told me that I couldn't cut her out of my life, that I owed her for everything she'd sacrificed for me. It wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. She was physically trying to keep me there, and it terrified me. I pulled away from her and told her again to leave, my voice shaking. When she refused, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I called the police. She didn't believe I'd actually do it, but when she saw me on the phone with the dispatcher, her entire demeanor changed. She went from furious to pleading in a matter of seconds, begging me not to humiliate her like this. But I was done. I'd reached my limit. I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. Not like this. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I explained the situation to them. They escorted her out of my apartment, but before she left, she gave me this look, one that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something deeper, more dangerous. She didn't say anything as they led her away, But I knew this wasn't over. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me. I'd see cars parked outside my building that I didn't recognize, and every time my phone rang, I expected it to be her. I blocked her number, blocked her on social media, but somehow she always found a way to get to me. She'd send letters to my apartment, slipping them under the door or leaving them in the mailbox. Each one was more unhinged than the last, filled with accusations, threats, and reminders of how I'd ruined her life. I kept trying to ignore it, hoping she'd eventually give up, but the breaking point came when I found her sitting outside my apartment building late one night. She was just sitting there, staring up at my window, waiting for me. When I confronted her, she started screaming at me in the middle of the street, telling me that I couldn't escape her, that I'd always be her son, no matter what I did. It was terrifying. I realized then that this wasn't just emotional abuse anymore. This was stalking. She wasn't going to stop until she'd completely broken me down, and I couldn't let that happen. That night, I made the decision to take legal action. The next morning, I went to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Despite everything she'd put me through, part of me still felt guilty, like I was betraying her by taking things this far. But I knew I didn't have a choice. She wasn't going to stop unless I made her, and I couldn't live my life in constant fear of when she'd show up next. The process took a few weeks, but eventually, the restraining order was granted. She's not allowed to come near me or contact me in any way. It's been a few weeks since then, and for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe again. I haven't seen or heard from her since the order went through, and I'm hoping it stays that way. I never imagined things would get to this point. I never thought I'd have to legally separate myself from my own mother, but here we are. It's heartbreaking in so many ways, but it's also freeing. I'm finally starting to rebuild my life without her constant presence looming over me. I know there's still a long road ahead. My therapist says it'll take time to fully heal from the years of manipulation and abuse. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm on the right path. I'm learning how to set boundaries, how to prioritize my own well-being, and how to let go of the guilt that's haunted me for so long. Thank you to everyone who's been supportive throughout this entire ordeal. Your comments and advice help me see things more clearly, and I'm grateful for that. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that it's okay to choose yourself, even if that means walking away from the people who are supposed to love you the most. Stay safe, everyone.